invite you to relax and get comfortable. Join me in this discussion of Just Another Theory. Thank you for joining me on Just Another Theory podcast, where you can relax and we talk about true crime. If you think you know the story of Steven Avery because you watched Ma'am, think again. I'm just going to talk along about my own experience throughout Steven Avery saga event, part of my life. So in 1998, a little town called Stanley, Wisconsin, put in a prison. In my backyard, let's say. Our local chit-chat was unfavorable. However, we had no choice. The prison got put in. And in 2003, headlines broke out all over the newspapers and even on Channel 13 News. A man named Steven Avery was being released from prison and had been exonerated from attempted murder. Well, none of us knew what exonerated meant. We saw it as an attempted murder getting released from prison. So there was quite a hubbub about, and right away everybody explained that he had served 18 years in prison when new DNA testing had just proven he didn't commit the crime. At the time, I wasn't alone in finding complete disappointment that this had even occurred to anybody. Serving 18 years of your life behind bars for something you didn't do. It brought a new understanding how wrong things can go. But at that time, I believed that the state of Wisconsin had made an error. Just simply, new DNA testing came along, and they could not have known back then that they were doing it wrong until I learned more. The standard amount of money given to a wrongful conviction person, such as Steven for 18 years in prison, was only $25,000 at the time. And so Steven had a meeting with Peg Lautenschlager, our governor of Wisconsin. It didn't go that well. She stood by the claim that no one did anything wrong, Steven. We now have new DNA testing, and that we could not have known about, and therefore we'll give you $45,000, and that's it, not a penny more. New headlines came across our front pages, all talking about this $450,000 lawsuit that Steven Avery was putting against the county of Manitowoc. Our local chitter-chatter became both for him and concerned for him. None of us felt he would get the $450,000, even though we knew that obviously somebody that would file a lawsuit felt that they were entitled to the money. This all was taking place during the Clinton administration, and our Attorney General was Janet Reno. A few select newspapers put out just a handful of excerpts of where Janet Reno asked Peg Lautenschlager a few questions during a closed-door investigation into the Avery situation. One of the newspaper write-ups that I personally read basically had Janet Reno going over the fine-tuning of an investigation, stating that you could not just focus on one individual, that it's now known that no matter what you think, you have to go by the evidence and look at all possibilities, that tunnel vision on one suspect would not work going forward. And yet, ironically, that's what this all turned out to be. Wisconsin is known for beer and brats because it is a German-based society. And that is one thing they have, is a very strong pride. And for Janet Reno to have publicly and privately called Peg Lautenschlager, our governor, out, while Steven's at the podium shaking hands with a lot of politicians in front of the national news, let's just say it didn't set well with Peg, nor her son, Josh Call, who became the next governor. Not only were we reading about Steven Avery, But he was also shaking hands with a lot of suits and politicians and appearing on television. He had become the ultimate poster boy for wrongful conviction at this time. The more popular and well-known that Steven Avery got, the more the lawsuit increased. And the next time I saw it, it was up over $1 million. Steven Avery's popularity and fame was growing nationwide attention, and he was pinning the tail of corruption onto the state of Wisconsin and the county of Manitowoc. I believe it was about $1.8 million when I found out what the Innocent Project was and how they were assisting Steven Avery. And wow, what a can of worms that opened. Depositions in Manitowoc County were being held with over 30 people in law enforcement in the sheriff's office. All I knew at that time was Steven was saying that they did know he was innocent and still kept him in prison. And there were a lot of people in that sheriff's office that had to answer to something. Steven even made the national news, where he was on podium in front of millions of people. And he said it wasn't about the money. He wanted the truth to come out, and he wanted people to be held accountable for the action they had taken. To me, before I even blinked an eye, the lawsuit headlines read $18 million. And this is when I began to fear for his own safety. Laws were about to be changed, and a new bill was going to be passed, and the Avery Task Force was born. Do you know who was on the Avery Task Force? That's a good question, right? Well, if you look back at that Avery Task Force, in hindsight, the members are oh so important to what's about to happen in 2005. Almost overnight, we had a $36 million lawsuit between Steven and Manitowoc County. $36 million would ruin the county. At least that's the perception that we were all given through the media, newspapers, and the news. However, much later we found out that that wasn't exactly true. The truth was that Steven was suing two individuals, the sheriff, Tom Kasurk at the time, and the DA, Dennis Vogel, both of which had been informed by their State Farm insurance that if it was found out that they were guilty of anything against Steven Avery that had put him in that position of being wrongfully convicted, they would not pay out. The more questions got answered by those during the deposition, the more it became apparent that Steve Avery had indeed won this $36 million lawsuit against Kasurek and Vogel. What came out of that deposition was the impression that they had other suspects but tunnel-visioned onto Steven, even going as to cover up information of tips of the actual assailant that had committed the crime, all the way up to the sheriff himself. You can bet there were some closed-door meetings with Peg Lautenschlager, who had denied Steven even $45,000, when now we're looking at $36 million. As I watched Steven in his news interviews shaking hands with very important people as this Avery Task Force was taking off, you can imagine Peg Lautenschlager wasn't taking this lying down, and it is said that she had many closed-door meetings with very important people that play a very important role in Steven's case coming up. What we learned out of that deposition is that Steven was exonerated in 2002, not 2003, a full year before he was released, and that there was postponement after postponement until it was almost a court order, if not a court order, that required Miss Sherry Culhane, the lead analysis at the State Crime Lab, to release the results needed. The new headlines that flooded the media was how ironic and coincidental that it was the original lab technician from the state of Wisconsin that had testified against Steven Avery when he was wrongfully convicted 18 years ago, was now the very person that was setting Steven free with a new DNA reveal. As October 2005 came along, it was quite shocking when on the news I saw Steven Avery, and it was saying there was a girl missing. named Teresa Halbach, 25-year-old freelance photographer that had been last seen at the Avery residence. My immediate thought was absolutely no way in hell could that possibly happen in a million years. Stephen is about to get handed a $36 million check in a day, and this girl literally goes missing from his driveway. When I heard this, I absolutely could not believe it. In fact, it was my understanding at that moment what I believed was that the county police had gotten together and basically framed him already, and that she probably was still alive somewhere. Each interview with Stephen seemed to be very much straight up. He never changed his story. He had no literal idea what could have happened to this girl, and he was hoping for her family she would come back. Within a few weeks, it was reported on the local news that they had found a burn pit directly behind Stephen's house, right next to a propane tank, with a puppy dog and a little doghouse, and they alleged that's where they found the bones of Teresa Halbach, as well as her electronics and her key found in his own bedroom. Most of us just shook our head and said there's no way. That propane tank would have blown. That little puppy dog would be singed and there would be no doghouse left. That little cardboard trailer home would have blown up into a big puffball of smoke. No way in God's green earth that could have happened right there. We interrupt this scheduled programming to bring you this new information regarding Teresa Halbach. That's what I heard as I sat down to dinner that night with my kids. We weren't watching the screen, and it wasn't normal to hear of anything that my kids couldn't hear on the news. Yet, that was a new low for King Kratz as he began to explain in detail during that news broadcast about the vehicle, the RAV4, that Teresa Halbach had owned. He stated there was pools of blood within the back seat. As you can imagine, I wasn't the only one that was shocked. The suits, including Mark Gunderman, everyone that had shaken hands with Stephen and patted him on the back, were stunned. I personally still didn't buy that Stephen had done anything, not with $36 million on the line. There was no way. But it made me wonder, had they really murdered someone, them county boys, just to put him back in prison? One important detail I don't want to forget to mention is on the morning of October 31st, 2005, hours before Teresa Halbach goes missing, Peg Lautenschlager takes over the Avery task force. And guess what? She fires everyone but two individuals, Norm Gahn and Jerome Buting. If those names sound familiar, that's good. That means you're paying attention when we get into the 2005 case where Stephen is on the trial for the murder of Teresa Halbach, because Norm Gahn is on the prosecution side, whereas Jerome Buting is on the defensive side for Stephen Avery. At this point, it divides most of us in the public in half. There are those that absolutely think that Stephen did this, that he probably did the first attempted murder as well. And then there was those, like myself, that absolutely did not believe that anybody would murder someone and put them right behind their own bedroom window when they are expecting $36 million check. It just didn't work. Within a few months, Stephen Avery made huge headline news again. But it wasn't about the $36 million. It was about his nephew, Brendan Dassey, who allegedly had given a confession that he and Brendan had murdered this girl in a horrific way where they dismembered and burnt her body in his very backyard. Months before there was any jury selected, the media was in a frenzy and being fed by the Calumet sheriff, and that would be Jerry Pagel and King Kratz, the soon-to-be prosecutor. There was some sort of an illusion that it being a different county would have no bias against Stephen. However, nobody was thinking of the bigger picture, and that is that the counties all answer to the state, and the governor, Miss Peg Lautenschlager, was not happy with Stephen at all. I took a deep breath in my life and thought, man, what a loser. How could he have done this? How could he have warped a child's mind to do such a deviant, wicked act as to murder such a young, beautiful girl? In 2007, when they found Stephen and Brendan guilty of killing Teresa Halbach, with a sad, sick stomach, I closed that chapter of my life, thinking I was closing the book on Stephen Avery. Fast-tracked my life 9 years to 2015. Just after Christmas, our bellies were full from a very delicious meal. We had opened all the gifts, and we settled in that evening to just enjoy something on TV. At that time, I was introduced to Making a Murderer, and I was highly against it. I did not want to hear anything about it. I was furious, and I told him, I don't want to know anything. An hour later, I was binging Making a Murderer. I couldn't stop watching, riveted to the screen, remembering all the flashbacks of everything that had occurred, and realizing I had let him down. I had let him down big time, and Stephen was still innocent, and it was the same people that had put him behind bars again. Even more so, had that county boys really killed her? Could they have really done that? Would they have really done that? And that's when I really dug in, and where my story starts is just the beginning. Thank you for tuning in to Just Another Theory podcast. I hope you'll join me for part 2 as we dig in together and talk about the Avery case. I love ya to the moon and back. God bless ya.